You are listening to the Beyond the High Road podcast with Shelby Milford, episode number 131. Stay tuned. Welcome to Beyond the High Road, a podcast dedicated to healing your heart and life following the grief of alienation. I'm your host, Shelby Milford, a twice certified life coach specializing in post-traumatic growth. If you're experiencing the effects of alienation and you're ready to heal, then this show is my love letter to you. Stay tuned. What's going on, y'all? How are we doing this week? I'm mixed. I'm kind of mixed. I'm like overall in great spirits, but this is what the topic's going to be about. This is that time of year, y'all, where I think a lot of you feel the same way. Like springtime, when the Easter dresses start coming out, when I start seeing the little girls. I don't know if it's because where I'm living, like in Florida. I kind of remember this happening in Texas though, too. But around this time, I just see the kids out playing more and, the little girls with their cute, messy hair done and their little dresses on. It's just going to Target and seeing them. It's just that time of year where everything's so active again. And it reminds me of when I was doing that stuff. I was thinking yesterday, I was outside repotting some plants yesterday afternoon, and I sat like on the ground and on my porch pavers. And I just sat there and was thinking about back in Austin, every year right around South by Southwest, we would start this routine. I'd pick her up from school. We'd go home. My house was just right around the corner from school. Well, for part of the time. We'd go home, do our homework, and then we would grab our bathing suits and go to my friend Mark's pool. And we would spend all afternoon, early evening there and play. I would tie balloons to her little bikini so that she could float around if she was too tired, and we just had a ball. Kitty chicken fights, it's just, we had so much fun around this time of year because also like Christmas, as y'all, if you've been doing the exchanges for a little while or did do them for a while, Christmas, I always knew I was going to have to split up. So I guess I don't want to say I got jaded around that, but it was a little bit different. Whereas the spring and summer, I knew I was going to be spending a lot of time with her, And yeah, we did alternate the spring breaks. But when I did have her, the year of spring break, the years that I did have her, oh my gosh, it was glorious because we would go to the pre-South by Southwest stuff. And I'd take her down to the Children's Museum, which was right downtown back in the day. We would just march around town together and have fun, get our faces painted, get her face painted. Until I started doing it for her, I would paint the kids' faces in the front yard every year too. But anyway, I guess it's just that time of year, this nostalgia. There's a lot of really great memories. And knowing that summertime, it's on its way. And I'll always spend so much more time with her over the summers, because, school was out. I couldn't wait every year for school to be out. Going places, coming down here to Florida, to the Keys. And so it's difficult every year still. Then yesterday, as I'm sitting out in my patio, I was thinking about regret, remorse, really, wishing that I would have known some things that I know, of course, today. Not living in it, but I am sad for the things and the tools that I did not yet have back then. And the things that I did not yet know back then. The courage that I did not yet have back then. I spent a lot of time, a lot of energy trying to hide. I don't know that I thought those words back then, but I was trying to protect myself and protect my daughter. So I just needed to remain like unseen, like not make myself a target. And by doing that, by sort of like creeping into the shadows, I feel today now that was an oversight. If I was to do it over, I would have faced everything head on as opposed to just hoping for and praying for silence and no activity, right? Like no news is good news. That's how I lived my everyday with them back then. Because the blow-ups were just so upsetting. I spent like the email exchanges and the attacks. It was just so much that I just wanted to keep everything quiet and not, make any waves. And I know that you guys all understand that. But now, looking back, not that I would choose to make waves, but I definitely think that today I wouldn't be as scared of their responses, of their backlash, because I know that today doing the things that I needed to do and facing them head on would have produced different results. They kept pushing because I was shrinking. The more that I shrunk, the more that they pushed. And I also was hiding too because I was protective of my own habits and my own shame, you know? So anyway, I guess what I'm saying is that it's okay. I think remorse especially is useful so long as you don't turn it into shame. There's a big difference. And I know I've done some episodes on this, but I always think it's a good reminder. Not everybody listens to every episode. So I just think it's good to remember that regret, remorse, they're both okay to feel. The bittersweetness of these great memories, amazing memories, and wishing that they were still. And knowing now what I know and knowing what I didn't know back then, like the gap in between, it's okay that I didn't know. And it's okay that I didn't act in the way that I would today. I mean, this is life. We don't know. If we could live life backwards, it would be an entirely different experience and probably pretty boring, actually. But I mean, I would take boredom any day if it meant that I had my kiddo. But how could I have known? How could you have known? The missteps or the lack of taking action or the whatever it is that you guilt yourself about, I think just allowing it to be okay is so loving to yourself and also will help you to be more loving towards others, compassionate towards others. When we afford ourselves, give ourselves some grace, we're much more able to show up coming from a place of love for all the other people in your life, including your children. I think what happens sometimes is when we allow guilt, which is different than remorse. Regret is kind of like one of those in-betweens. It's a little bit more self-centered, right? So remorse, I don't know if I've talked about this before or not. Remorse is more like other-centered, like it's an emotional response, deeper emotional response as a result of knowing that you impacted somebody else's life in a way that you wish you hadn't. It's like a moral acknowledgement of having caused somebody else pain or having been a part of the pain. Also, too, remorse can be, this happened actually with one of my friends. Maybe you were driving the car and you came out unscathed, but other passengers in the car were hurt. That could, of course, cause remorse. You could have not been driving the car, but been in the car and been the only survivor, and the other ones have gotten hurt and also feel remorse because you were present when others were hurt. I think I did have an episode on this. Regret, on the other hand, is more of not necessarily an admission of guilt, but more like you're wishing things that would have been different for yourself, like wishing that you wouldn't be feeling the guilt that you're feeling. Regret it's not always a bad thing. It can actually be useful. Like you have regret for not doing something, taking advantage of an opportunity in the past, right? Going to college or, like that. Regret is usually more introspective, where remorse more centers around the feelings that you have about the way that your actions or non-actions impacted somebody else's life, whether intentionally or non-intentionally. And that's where I think is key for us as alienated parents is most of the time we're coming from survival mode. We're real, like we got to save our kids, we got to save ourselves. And this is what we think we need to do. So you're not actually thinking with your prefrontal much of the time when you're in survival mode. And so maybe today you look back on the things that you did, like, what was I thinking? Or why did I do it that way? What's wrong with me? And that is where, like that punishing stuff, that is where shame comes into the picture and cuts off your ability to actually grow and learn from the situation and do it different. Because now you've taken it shame, and shame will take your remorse or take all of your mistakes and shove them down and want to keep them secret. As opposed to, which makes sense, especially because depending on how long you've been alienated or when you made these mistakes, just even 5 years ago, society as a whole wasn't in a place where it like personal growth through your mistakes was a thing, and especially coming from the person that's alienating your kids from you, right? They want to shame you. They want to, denigrate, put you down. But today, the accountability and acknowledging how you affected somebody's life, like I said, knowingly or unknowingly, even coming from what you think it was right to do at the time, which is all we all can do, right? It is more accepted. So I was thinking about that and about how I didn't know. And then I was thinking, how could I have known? And how could I have known what was to come for me back then when I was in the, survival mode and hiding out, right? How could I have ever known what was to come for me throughout the, however many years it's been? I could never have dreamed up that I would be sitting here today talking with you guys after bringing myself through what I did without drinking, no less, using a crutch in order to not feel for so long, without having some guy be my savior, or getting into another unhealthy relationship or, whatever. My whole life had sort of, as you guys have heard me say, just sort of ricocheted off of people, places, and things. And so for me to be sitting here today, talking with you guys, other parents going through this, and being on the other side of that, if you know what I'm saying, like I'm still very much in the alienation as far as my relationship with my daughter. But I never in a million years would have guessed that I would be here as comfortable in my skin as I am today, and have created a life around helping others to do the same, following what we've been through. Never in a million years. And so it made me think about, like, if this version or even a future version of me, which I don't even know what that's going to look like, could talk to the past version of me, what would she say, And then it reminded me of this Instagram post that I saw. The guy's name is Max Stossel, and he's a poet. He had this post that stopped me in my tracks, and I thought it was such a great comparison. Now, I believe the comparison that he was trying to make was life and death, and that there's more after death. But I think that you can use it for anything. For me, I was thinking about the way that I'm going to use it with you guys. Okay. So I'm not going to do it justice. So you may want to go look it up and watch him do this. But I guess it's the opening to his show. And he talks about these two babies that are having a debate on life after delivery. So they're in their mother's womb. And the first baby says to the second baby, "Do you believe in life after delivery?" And the second baby says, "Of course, there has to be life after delivery. Maybe we're here to prepare ourselves for what will be later." And the first baby said, "Nonsense. There's no life after delivery. What kind of life would that be?" And the second baby says, "I don't know, but there has to be more light than here. Maybe we'll walk and run with our legs, and we'll eat with our mouths and our hands. Maybe we'll have so much more than we can't even understand now." And the first baby says, "That's ridiculous. Walking is impossible. And eating with our mouths and our hands, that sounds absurd. We eat with the umbilical cord. The umbilical cord provides us everything that we need, but it's far too short to supply us out there." And the second baby says, "But what if it's just different than here? Maybe we don't need that cord anymore." And the first goes, "Okay, well, if there is life after delivery, then tell me, why has nobody ever come back from there? Delivery has to be the end of life. Out there is nothing but darkness and oblivion. It takes us nowhere, and we'd have nobody to take care of us." And the second said, "But certainly we'll meet the mother, and the mother will take care of us." And the first says, "Mother? You actually believe there's a mother? If the mother exists, then where is she now? How come we don't see her now?" And the second baby says, "She's all around us. We are of her. We live inside of her. Our world is her. Without her, we couldn't exist." And the first says, "I don't see her. It's only logical that she's not here." And the second replied, "Sometimes when you're in the silence and you really listen closely, you can hear her. You can perceive her presence. You can sense her. You can hear her voice." That was the end of the post, but that was enough. It's this idea that, of course, things are going to be so much different. There's this whole world, these babies who obviously can't really talk, but there's this whole world playground out here after delivery. This is when we believe right now that life begins. We really have no idea what's in store for us. until we're on the other side. We just don't know. Me, same thing. When I was in the darkest moments of my life, I could never, ever in a million years imagine that I would have made it out and made it out emotionally, mentally, even better than how I was back then. More emotionally intelligent, more whole than I was back then, more aware. Who would have ever thought that? So if you're in that place right now where things seem hopeless and you're just not sure of how anything could ever get better for you, how life could renew for you after this tragedy of alienation and the abuse that may still be happening with your children, just remember that nothing is off the table. The possibilities are really endless. And I think that when we're in our own worlds and looking at our own path, wearing the horse blinders of trauma, where we can only see what's in front of us, it's so hard to understand or fathom that good could come from what we've been through, what we're going through. But keep putting one foot in front of the other. Choose to have faith in your future, in your child's future. Another thing I was thinking the other day was about how I've chosen the stories, I guess, that I have strategically. Like the story that I used to tell and the story that I could tell to this day about my life and what all of this alienation is going to mean for me and what it does mean for me and what it means for my daughter and us combined. I could make it mean a lot of things. The story, the other day, I was thinking about how I used to tell, like when alienation was happening from the get, like all the strategies were being put in place by my ex and his now wife very early on. But things really didn't start to take hold. The way that I see it on the timeline is really about the time when I got together with the second guy. For a long time, I told the story silently on the inside that it was because of him. And if I never would have met him, then none of this would have happened. And so I could tell my story to this day about like how I was just minding my own business in my house and I was cleaning the floors, which is actually legit. I was cleaning my floors. I remember what I was wearing when my friend at the time, this girl, Kristen, brought my now ex over to my house one night. Like I was not out looking to date anybody. She just brought him over for the purpose of, playing matchmaker. And so she had her boyfriend over there at the time. But if she never would have brought this guy over to my house, none of the rest of the events would have ever taken place. And I could actually feel a victim to that. But I don't to this day. I don't tell the story about how this guy came over and made me believe that he was one person when he was another and that he knew what he was doing the whole time and that he was playing me like a fiddle in order to take advantage of me later. I don't tell that story anymore because I know that I had a hand in that. Now, did I want to be a hand in that? And was my life going in a different direction? Was I just gaining some ground, like in my own journey, my own path moving forward? Like alienation was happening. There was some crazy stuff that happened in the couple years beforehand. I had gotten pulled over for the DUI and what have you. And I was on the upswing from that. And so whenever I met Brian, things started to take a sharp turn back south, right? But today, I don't blame it all on him. It is true. I do believe that if I never would have met him, these things would have happened. But I know too that I made so many decisions like after the initial meeting him. He came to my house. I didn't have to say, okay, spend the night. I didn't have to the next day after we'd all parted, ask him to come back over. At the first red flag, I didn't have to continue seeing him. I chose those things. And I believe today that I made those choices because that's what I was meant to do. Like it was always going to happen this way, right? And so nobody took advantage of me. I was in this mental, emotional, spiritual place that I was back then because I still needed to go through things, right? And yeah, it was a lot of suffering. It was a lot of unconscious living, but it was me that was there making those decisions. I don't fault me today for that. I am sad for me back then, right? I'm sad for me. I'm sad for my daughter. for everybody involved, especially her. But I also still trust to this day that I have faith that this is what's going to bring her to her highest self and me to my higher self. Like guaranteed, if I didn't go through what I did with that Brian guy, I wouldn't have so much wisdom that I have today about myself and about the personality traits of somebody that would do that and why I chose that, I don't choose to spend time on learning more about the narcissist or narcissist type person, but I definitely learned a lot and still continue to learn a lot about my choices and the role that I played, what I brought to the table in each one of those relationships. So anyway, I think it's just important to make that distinction in each one of y'all's stories too. Like, yes, things went down, and I'm sad for that person back then, that mother or father back then that didn't know, but that's actually a reason for you to celebrate the growth that you've done since from then till now. Do you know what I'm saying? Like, now I know the difference. How amazing is it that I'm more aware today than I ever was, right? It's terrible that I had to go through what I did in order to learn it, but how else are you going to do it? Like I had this set of skills from when I was a kid, and those skills served me. Those thought behaviors, those patterns that I had back then, they served me for a period of time. They just stopped serving me at some point. And the sooner that I acknowledge that, the sooner that I start making a better life for myself moving forward. There's a choice always. There were choices back then for me. It's so many that I made over and over, not knowing, yes. And there's choices today that I have on which stories I'm deciding to regurgitate. So many of us, the reason why we're suffering is because we choose the story that's on repeat in our head, like on auto replay in our head. For every situation and scenario that comes up in our life, we already have a narrative like easy access, like grabbing 8 tracks. And I do mean 8 tracks. If you guys don't know what that is, like if you're listening and you're in your 20s or 30s, go look it up. It's just like old school tapes that our brain will just pull up and put in and press play for, because our brain likes to what? Be efficient. So now it's going to take a lot of effort for you to start choosing stories on purpose so that you don't suffer as much as you were, right? Like when a stressful event comes up, your brain will go through a cycle of secreting stress hormones, And because if you've been through any prolonged period of stress in childhood or later on in adulthood, like what we're going through, what we've gone through, then your brain has probably gotten your body, your central nervous system has gotten used to secreting that cocktail. And so in order to retrain your central nervous system and your brain, it has to start with your thoughts, because the thoughts are the 8 tracks that your brain has made all habit. And so every time that you replay an old tape, an old 8-track, you have the option to incorporate your higher thinking, your prefrontal cortex, and say, wait a second, is that the story? Not even is that true, though you can say, is this really true for me? Is this really what happened back then? And is it still happening now? No, it's not happening now. Cool. Let's make a new story. So you can right then and there take over, be the curator of your past, your present, and your future by deciding to retell it. Don't take your past events and the stories, the 8 tracks that you're playing, as fact, and that's how you need to always tell them. For instance, like for me, the Brian guy broke my arm. I mean, he kicked it into 2, and had to have surgery and all the things. I could tell that story in one way, where he was an awful, ugly, whatever to me. And I could have that story affect me from the time that I told it back then to each time that I retell it in today's world. I could enter a stress response thinking about that time when he did it. I mean, I could go back and replay the events in my head and think, what an awful monster. But what is that going to do but only haunt me in my today and forward? Instead, I choose to be the hero of that story. So I don't tell it from the perspective of what an evil, I was being attacked, and the brain won't perceive it as that you were then being attacked. It's like I am being attacked. So that's going to have an effect on you now and moving forward, and how you approach each and every relationship that you get into from here on out, romantic relationships and of course many other relationships. I'm talking about me really, but if this is you, you know, if you got a similar story and you're continuing to retell it from like almost like present tense about your past, with the same facts as you're reliving it, right? You're re-traumatizing yourself each and every time you do it. I don't have to take those facts and use them against me. Just like for you, your story. Or you could decide to not even tell that story at all, which by the way, that story that I just right there told you, there was only, I think, one other time that I've actually fully told that, and that was with you guys on here. Ever think about that stuff. Except I will say with my arm, I still have to coach myself when I knock it on something and it hurts on what I'm making that mean for me, you know? But otherwise, I don't tell those stories. And I most of the time forget all of the stuff that really happened, unless some reminder, you know, my brain decides to randomly grab some old 8-track due to some sort of environmental reminder. I hear a song or whatever. But otherwise, I choose not to tell those stories because they don't need to be important for me. They don't need to be like the markers. Like you look back on your life and back on your situation of alienation, so long as you're not going back to court. Like if you need those things on recall for you to go back to court and do whatever, then there's a way to do that. I'm not talking about that here. But look at the timeline of events that you retell yourself, or like the little mile markers, if you will, that stick out about your past, like the monumental events that have happened. What are those? Are they stories of defeat and of suffering, or are they stories of growth, overcoming? I mean, it's the easiest thing to do is go, okay, what am I telling myself about my past right now? And the first thing that pops up in your head, go into that story and reconstruct that for yourself, each one of them, you know? If you're not ready to take on the higher ground story or the story of growth, unicorns and puppy dog tails and rainbows and all that, you don't have to take that. But instead of saying life is over, it'll never get better from here, maybe just ask yourself, but what if? What if it does get better from here? What if my child and I do reconnect at some point? What if I grow like crazy and completely outdo all of my expectations of myself? What if I could come through this, bring myself through this, and surprise myself, surprise everybody? What would that say about me in the end? That I'm not only a survivor, but I'm a badass, you know? What if I'm a badass? And we already know the answer to that. You know that you are. You're sitting here, doesn't matter where you are in your story. If you are dealing with somebody standing in between you and your child, and you're still here standing and wanting to listen to a podcast with the intention to heal your life, you already are a badass. You've already come through so much. The courage and the audacity that you already displayed to bring yourself through this far, you're not a number. Like I used to think about like statistics, own statistics say, and whatever. I don't want to be a statistic. I want to be the exception. So don't compare your life to others or what you think is possible for you, or what, if it looks bleak right now and you're just not sure, it's the unknown and you're going to all the, worst case scenarios. Just what if? What if there's no scenario that's even possible for me to imagine is my end result? Like, what if it's so good that it doesn't even make sense, can't even fathom it because it's that good? What if? And what's the downside to thinking about it that way? What could be the worst consequences for you to believe that maybe something better than I could ever have dreamed of could come out of this, will come out of this? What's the drawbacks to that? I don't see any. The only reason why we don't do that for ourselves, why we don't look to our future dream, is because we think we don't want to be disappointed. We better just set our expectations low. And that if you've listened to any of the episodes that I used to share that same, I still work on that for myself, view. Like I just need to set my standards low and my expectations low so I don't disappoint myself. But really, what's the disappointment? You've already come through so much that you never thought you would ever be able to come through. So what's the downside to trying? The real failure is you not trying at all. The active failures of trying and going and dreaming and believing in yourself and your child and your union, and that your bonds can never be broken, ever be broken, no matter what they do, how deep the brainwashing or alienation, the abuse runs. Y'all's bond can never be broken. And that is why the alienator knows that. And that is why their efforts continue, is because they know that. That is a constant fear for them. They know that y'all's bond is it's unbreakable. You know, like, I don't know if you've ever asked yourself, like, gosh, why can't they just stop? They've already won. You know, how many times I used to ask that to myself all the time. Aren't they satisfied? They've gotten everything that they want. They've taken everything from me. They have my child. They have my money. They have stripped me dry. Why do they keep coming at me? This is why. They know that y'all's bond is unbreakable, because also it is genuine. It's real. It's authentic. They know that you have the capacity to connect on a level that maybe they can't. So just know that needs to always be in your back pocket, not as a judgment and a better than thing, but just trust in y'all's bonds. You are interwoven into the fabric of your child or children's, each one of your children's being. Not only is your DNA interwoven into each cell inside of them, but also all of that time you spent with them before this all happened, all of those little moments that you share come out in their daily interactions with the world. The way that they stand or put their hand on their hip or talk, their accent, or however they carry themselves, facial expressions, it all shines through. You can never be removed from your child at a cellular level. It runs deep. So just keep remembering that. Don't tell yourself stories like that I've lost my child forever, that nothing good can come from all of this disaster that we've all been through. It's not true. It doesn't have to be true anyway. Okay, so that's all I have for you guys. I hope you have a lovely week, and I'll see you next week. Okay.
Thanks so much for listening today. If you like what you're hearing and you'd like to hear more, please make sure to click subscribe wherever you're listening or watching. Also, for bite-sized clips and tips, be sure to find me on TikTok or Instagram. See you next week.